Amen. Just want to summarize some of the major points, if they're major, some of the points that we've come to. We're in chapter 17 of the Great Controversy. We looked at the heralds of the morning. We didn't come to a conclusion what the morning was, but the heralds come by different names. They're the tokens, they're the signs, they're the harbingers of this morning. And it seems to me that that morning is referring to the second advent. And if people have come to another conclusion, or a different conclusion, or any conclusion. So that's what we've discussed so far. We then looked at what those signs were. We spent some time having a cursory look at Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. And when we were doing that, we took a little time, even though I didn't structure the chapter this way, because I really didn't want to go into the chapter. The chapter's broken down into 3 sections. I don't think I even mentioned this really. You can see all of this clearly in chapter 69, The Desire of Ages. It really would be worth your while reading that chapter in connection with these 3 Gospels. And if you were to do that, you'd see that Christ focuses on 2 specific histories. One of them is the history of the disciples, and the other one is the history of God's people after the Dark Ages. So let me just do a schematic of that. So it's really in 3 sections. It's the history of the disciples, then it's the history of, I'll just put the 1260, and then it's the history of God's people in the time of the end. Once you can see that structure, you'll notice that he skips over this period here. And that was part of the discussion that we had yesterday about Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles till the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. It's described slightly differently in each of those 3 chapters. And that's what that picture work is here. So this history here is like this. From AD 70 to 1798, he pretty much skips over that history, and she explains why he does that. So there's a focus on this history, a cursory look at this one, and then this history of the time of the end. So if we don't see that in its original application, we're apt to make mistakes. And we discussed the issue about the wars, if you remember. If you're in class, we discussed about the wars. The wars are in this section. They're the wars connected to the disciples. If you see what Ellen White's commentary on it, it's as it was described. It's this internal struggle in Rome. It's as nations were trying to free themselves from the bondage of Rome. And if you don't see it in the original setting, it's really difficult to make applications at the end of the world. You end up being lost and just saying there's lots of wars at the end of the world, and it becomes a meaningless token really. And that's the mess that God's people are in. We don't know how to read the signs properly that are here at the end of the world. They're very specific. So we discussed that, and obviously, I say obviously, if you're in this message for any length of time, I think it was, I just want to go to the verse. We don't need to turn there. Just want to make sure I say the phrase correctly. verse 6, it says, but the end is not yet. So it talks about the end, and that end is AD 70. Just want us to know that. But you'll have noticed that many people, when we first discussed it, said that's talking about the end of the world. And what they're doing is they're getting this line of history and they're breaking it like this, and they're creating three separate histories, three separate lines, which is what you're required to do. So when you make an application, verse 6, the end is not yet, you would bring that to the end of the world. So there is that legitimacy. I'm not denying that's not what we're supposed to do. What my, I don't know, objection is the right word to say it. What I want us to see is the way we do that should be done carefully. It's very easy just to read those passages and say, in the history of the disciples, you're going to get disfellowshipped. So it's easy just to see that. You're going to go to court. You can see all those things, but how and when those things happen needs to be considered carefully. And the only way you can do that, I'm contesting, is by understanding that history well. Then, as I say, there's the second segment, which we can discuss, and he doesn't really go into details of it. And then there's quite a lot of details here, and our focus has been here at this last part of this vision, this prophecy. And these are the signs or the tokens that we've been looking at in some detail in class. So we're focusing on this history here, 1798. But before you get to 1798, there are some tokens or signs that are connected with it. We discussed them, 1755, 1780. 1780 becomes the premier sign. And the reason why it becomes the premier sign is because of 1773. 1773 is when persecution effectively ceases, at least from the perspective of the papacy. Now, when Ellen White makes that comment, she's not going to... She's on an agenda, if I can put it that way. She wants to direct us in a certain way, but that's not the complete story. So we'll just run it the way she says that. 1773, persecution effectively ceases. The reason it ceases is two things. First of all, the Jesuit order is going to be disannulled through pressure from the European countries, and you can begin to see also the rise of the United States. There's tension between the United States and the United Kingdom, and 1773 marks the Boston Tea Party. We haven't gone into the details of what that meant, so we would do that if we were going to study it and then make application. So we discussed that. Then we went from that line and we redrew it out here, and this is the dark day, the stars, and the distress of nation. And all of these become signs. Before we went on to that, we spent some time looking at the reason why the papacy is going to receive a deadly wound. The classic reason that we understand that, we can see from Isaiah chapter 10. In Isaiah chapter 10, it's self-exhortation that demands God punish the tool that he used to chastise his people. When Babylon's doing that work for God, it doesn't even realize why it's doing that. It doesn't realize that God is essentially disciplining a disobedient child. He has no intention of destroying his people. That's never his intention. It's just punishment. Punishment in measure. Babylon doesn't realize that. It just sees God's people, Jerusalem, Israel, as any nation. And they're going to wipe or attempt to wipe them out completely. And they're going to ascribe all of that ability to their own strength and wisdom. So God's going to punish them for that. We saw a different perspective. The different perspective is that God's given the papacy a mission to do, and they become derelict in their duty because they stop persecuting people 25 years before they're supposed to. God can't have that because it would break, if we're going to see this as a 25-20, it's going to break that prophecy. So he's going to raise up someone else to finish that work. And the people that he's going to raise up, because he doesn't have that many choices, is France. But France has already been there on the scene. France was the king of the north. It was in close alliance with the papacy from the very beginning. So France has to change its role from the king of the south to the king of the north. And it does that just at the right time that the papacy is ceasing to do its work of persecution. So once the papal church stops persecuting through those states, France will pick up that work. So we discussed that, and we see that in Revelation 11. There's a third element that we didn't discuss that we all, I think, are familiar with, that the papacy is going to be punished. Now the papacy is going to be punished. This is a separate thread, a separate line. We've got multiple themes running through this history, and sometimes it can be confusing. So I didn't discuss that third one. It's the one that we discussed the most in our movement, and this is Islam. The role of Islam in the 1260. So a simple way of looking at that, I would think, is that Islam is going to be used to punish Babylon, if I can use it that way, Rome specifically, when it goes too far in its opposition to God. And the opposition to God is identified in 538, where it makes a Sunday law. Once it crosses that line, God says, this is too far, I never asked you to go that far in persecuting my people. Then he's going to send Islam to punish the papacy. He's already done that work before when it comes to pagan Rome. And the reason why it's interesting to see the role of Islam is because the breakup of pagan Rome here into the 10 toes is connected to the work of Islam. Sorry, not Islam, the 4 trumpets that come before it, because Islam is one of the 7 trumpets, not Islam. So we see that the breakup of pagan Rome, or the punishment of pagan Rome, is done by these first 4 trumpets. And then when the papacy does the same offence, makes a Sunday law, because pagan Rome had already made a Sunday law, 321, they're going to receive a similar punishment. Now it's Islam that's going to be doing that work. And Islam essentially stops doing that work. It runs out of steam. It loses direction. So once it does that, then God has to raise up a new power to finish the work that Islam didn't complete, which is to punish the papacy. And again, France takes up that role. So there's just another line of history that I think we're familiar with, which we didn't discuss. So the 2 that I wanted us to see, the one that we normally understand, papacy gets punished, receives a deadly wound because of self-exaltation, gadal, we use that phrase. The other reason is that it stops persecuting God's people, 1773. And that's connected to the work of the Jesuits and also the work or the role of the United States. So we discussed all of that. Then we looked at these signs. We went into Matthew 24, Luke 21, and we had some discussion of how we actually view those verses. And if we're in Matthew, I think we were doing it from Luke, so I'll go to Luke because that's the one that's probably in your notes. So in Luke 21, we often teach in our message that when you get to verse 30, Ellen White, when she quotes verse 30, calls it the budding trees of spring. And whatever the reason or the logic, which I'm not going into, we've made that verse 30, 9-11. I'm not saying we were right or wrong, I'm just stating it as a fact. So we made verse 30, 9-11, and it's easy if we're not careful to pick up from around verse 25. Before I go to verse 25, if we go from verse 20 to verse 24, Luke 21, 20 to 24, that's this line here. So Luke 21, 20 to 24. When you see Jerusalem, verse 20, compassed with armies, that's AD 66, then you know that the desolation thereof, of Jerusalem, is near at hand, AD 70. Then it gives you some instructions of what to do. And then you get to verse 24. They shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And I'm saying that takes you all the way to 1798, essentially. So what you've got there is pagan persecution and papal persecution, and all that we're doing, or all that Jesus is doing, is picking up the tail end of the pagan persecution. So if you can conceptualize it that way, because when this was spoken about, there was some discussion. Sister Tess said this was the 1260s, the 2520. But obviously we know this is not 1260. It's long, it's far short of 1260, it's just the tail end of the 1260. But if we can see it as part or a theme or conceptually as the 2520, this pagan persecution and papal persecution, it allows you to understand, and we didn't discuss this bit. Okay, before I go there, is everybody okay with that? Verse 20, when you see the armies coming, know that destruction is about to happen, AD 70, and it's going to be a bad time. Then, verse 25 verse 24, Jerusalem shall be trodden down by the Gentiles. And again, we didn't go into the details of this, but I did introduce Revelation 11 verse 2, where it says for 1260 years the holy city is trampled underfoot. Now, to really defend that properly, you'd have to go into the book of Daniel, and if you went into the book of Daniel, you could go to Daniel 7, Daniel 8, and Daniel 9, and if you paralleled the verses, the right verses, you could defend this thing. But I'm not going to do that because I think most of us would see that's reasonable, because we're all familiar with the 2520. Is everybody okay with that? That logic, what I've just said, explaining the verses, just summarizing. So, if you can see that this is a form of the 2520, if you can just see it in that way, that all we're picking up is the tail end of that, then when you go to Daniel chapter 8, Daniel chapter 8, Daniel chapter 9. Daniel chapter 8 is the 2300 days, it's not the 2520. Hopefully we're all clear on that. But when you do that, what we've just done here, you can see that there's a relationship between the 2300 days and the 2520. So, if I were to break up the 2300 days like this, and the verses would direct you to this. You'd have 1844, you'd have 1798, and you'd have 457. So this is the 2300-day prophecy. And if you go into the verses and look at them carefully, what you can develop or you can see is that the 2300 days, if we were to put 538 here, this is 457 BC, we can see this, these dates in Daniel chapter 8. You need Daniel chapter 9 to help you along the way. We know that this is papal here, and this is pagan, but this is not 677 or 723. This is not the beginning of the work of paganism. So if you can see it here, the 2520, the structure of it, you can see the same thing here in Daniel chapter 8. And once you can conceptualize that, just based upon this, because this is easy to see, you can build up, I think, a reasonably good defense for the 2520. It's a different approach to look at the 2520, to see the relationship between the 2300 days and the 2520. Once you can do that, then you can do some, perhaps a nice thing that you could do is if you understood what 220 means, you'd have 2300 days, 2520, and you'd see 220 here. And so you can see the relationship between 2300 days and 2520, but the 2300 days is a part or a component of the 2520. That's the only point I wanted to pick up. You can see that in Daniel 8. You have to use a bit more than Daniel 8 to see that, but it's just based upon this logic here, which we can get straight out of Luke 21. It's easy to see. This is not some fanciful work. So we did all that. Then I think it was yesterday's class. I can't remember if it was the last class. We mentioned about Luther. You remember Luther in 1540? That's the date that Brother Theodore gave us. He's saying 300 years Christ is about to come back. Obviously he was slightly out in his calculations, but not far out. And he's basing that upon his understanding that the papal church is the Antichrist, or the man of sin, that needs to be put away before Christ can come back. And he's factoring in the 1260. So he's using time to do that calculation, even though it's a little bit vague. And then we went to 309 paragraph 1. 309 paragraph 1 tells you the condition of God's people here in 1798 onwards. That's the condition of God's people. And when you read it, it pretty much looks like they're in a Laodicean condition. And we had a discussion about whether or not they're Laodicea or not. I know not everybody agreed, but I'm saying this is not Laodicea, this is Sardis, and Laodicea comes afterwards. Laodicea, okay, we'll leave Laodicea for the moment, and this condition of worldliness that's brought to view in 309 paragraph 1 is the condition of God's church, which is Sardis. And I wanted to develop an argument for us to see that this is not some condition that they just fell into ad hoc. They just got tired or something and it just happened per se. They lost their focus. This is not about morality so much as about doctrine. It's been created, this moral situation has been created by doctrine. And I use the phrase, the Counter-Reformation, which I think most of us are familiar with. The Counter-Reformation was the work of the Jesuits. That's what they were created to do. And obviously the term is obvious, Counter-Reformation. It's to work against the Reformation. One of the works of the Reformation, it didn't start that way, it was justification by faith, ended up morphing into Protestantism, because that's not what it started as. It started as justification by faith. Protestantism means someone who's fighting or warring or protesting against the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church is the man of sin. So you've got two people that are fighting against one another, and one of them is calling the other the man of sin. So as soon as you get to the man of sin, you're going to have to incorporate time into that argument, which we read that's what Luther had already begun to do. And so the Counter-Reformation is going to argue against that, and one of the things it's going to do to diffuse the ability of the Protestants to call the papacy the man of sin is they're going to deal with time. They're going to introduce the Millennium Doctrine. And Brother Bob gave us a nice little overview. We have mentioned three names: Darby, Moody and Schofield. He's an Englishman. He found some document in Oxford. It then goes to the United States. So I'm not going to go over that again, but he mentioned about that. So this is a Catholic doctrine. And if you go to 309 paragraph 1, 309 paragraph 1, the last half of the last sentence says that the church, God's people, were putting far into the future the solemn day. And the reason they were doing that is because that's what they'd been educated doctrinally to believe. So this doctrine went from Catholicism into Protestantism. Because this is, it talks about, this is the Protestant churches, we saw that. So the problem that the Millerites are facing here is that God's church have been seduced and taught doctrines from the papal church. That's Revelation 2:20. And they were taught that in the 1260. So when they come out of Babylon in 1798, they're going to come out of the grave, for sure, because they've got a name that says they are now alive, Sardis, but they're really dead. And that death-like condition is because they have held on to papal doctrines. And the thing that we often focus on when we say they're holding on to papal doctrines is, what doctrine do we believe they're holding on to? Sunday. We say, they're holding on to Sunday, and then Bates and Rachel Oakes are going to do their work, and then by the time you get to 46, Ellen White's going to be free from the shackles of Catholicism. And then we might also talk about the state of the dead, which gets addressed in 1844. But I'm saying all that's true, but the premier one that we've missed, because the Millerites aren't arguing about the Sabbath, and they're not arguing about the state of the dead. That was not their mission. Their mission was the unsealing of the book of Daniel, which was what? What was the unsealing? It was in relation to time. That's the fight. They become the Protestants now, because they're protesting against the Antichrist, Catholicism, and they're doing their job, which is attacking them on the doctrine that is the one that needs to be addressed, which is the issue of time. So that's why there's all this discussion about the millennial doctrine, and this is what Miller has to deal with from the very beginning to the very end of his message. Does that make sense? So what I've tried to do is look at Millerite history from a different perspective to hopefully help make sense of why some of those things happen and why we believe what we believe about the Millerite history. But not only that, once you see the dynamics that are going on, then when you do line upon line, you're then able to approach line upon line with a different perspective. And time becomes a serious element in that dialogue now. Because then we have to understand, what does Ellen White mean when she says we shouldn't have any messages dealing with time, where let's not worry about what the church teaches, just in this movement, whether you've left the movement or you haven't left the movement. We know the Millerite message, Millerite movement is the first and second angels' messages. Revelation 10, verse 3, the seven thunders was a delineation of events that should transpire on the first and second angel's message. Brother Daniel was discussing that. And I think everybody agrees with that. Based upon that logic, if you've been in this movement, even if you've left, you take that concept, some people who begin to shy away of parable of the 10 virgins has been fulfilled and will be fulfilled to the very letter. But many people still hold on to that in some shape or form. But if you hold on to line upon line and you're going to take the Millerite history and you're going to say, this is going to be brought into our history, how can we deny one of the, I don't even say one of the premier theme of that history is time setting. And that time setting is not in opposition to God, it's doing God's will. Because the people who fight against time setting are the people who have imbibed papal doctrines. And this is Sardis. So when we had the discussion about where we're going to place Laodicea, if you remember that discussion we had in class, I'm not just saying, okay, I'm saying it's Laodicea because you can see that structurally. Structurally, Laodicea doesn't come into effect 1798. It's post 1844. So you can just show it that way. But it's not just that. If you can see that the condition of Sardis is about time, and that condition that's created in the Church of Sardis was based upon the doctrine of time, and it was introduced or given to them by the papal church back here, Revelation 2:20. Everybody got that logic? Then what you then do, if you're going to do line upon line, is you're going to take that dynamic and bring it to the end of the world. Now, we've already set up, because we were setting you up, that this 1260 suddenly becomes what for us here?
126.
Suddenly becomes 126. So 538 suddenly becomes what year? Sister Bronwyn?
1844.
What does 1798 become for us? What year does that become for us? 1989. 126 years. 1863, yeah?
Yep.
Okay, so we then suddenly are not just taking Millerite history now. What have we just done? Even though perhaps we didn't realise we were doing this, we're now taking the history of the Dark Ages and introducing that into our line. Now, we always do that. I rubbed out what we did yesterday in prayer meeting. Before the time of the end, you've got a period of darkness. So we already did that, but we normally didn't worry about it too much. But now we've got firm evidence to demonstrate that we have a time of the end, and it's much more structured than we ever thought. Just want us to see that. So once we do that, then we have to bring Thyatira here, Revelation 2:20. Then we have to introduce the concept of the angel of Thyatira. What's he doing? He's doing two things. Brother Mario, what's he doing? Sorry? I didn't hear you. Not sure? Sister Tess, what's he doing?
Allowing Jezebel to teach and seduce.
So he's allowing Jezebel's the papal church, to do that work. Now, when it was doing that work back here in the 1260, who did it use? Who did it use? The Jesuits, Counter-Reformation. So she's going to use someone to do her work for her. But what we've developed is a structure here that's going to create a situation where God's people are in dire straits. And that's why we want to see Laodicea as a separate and distinct experience from Sardis. It's not my intention to go into that and develop this line, but I just wanted to see us to see it at that simple level. Laodicea is going to be the modern day experience of the Millerite history here. It becomes more complex now as we do this, but I just want to see that in a simple way. Laodicea is what kind of condition? Worldliness. So our church talks about we're in a really worldly condition. What's the solution? What's the solution for worldliness?
Time.
No. They won't tell you that. Missionary works. The most obvious one people talk about is 1888. Yeah? We need to get back to our roots. If we only listened to Wagner and Jones and did the 1888 thing, justification by faith, we all look to ourselves, look to our families, got our house in order, stop being worldly, start being nice to one another, it'll all be sorted out. Yeah? So we know that has to be wrong. I'm not denying the 1888 message, because that's another story that we would really need to spend time discussing. The solution to the problem here for Sardis, this worldliness, which is identical to Laodicea, is what? That is time. So when we start thinking about Laodicea, and I'm not drawing this out how it works, because it's not as straightforward as this, that the solution to coming out of the Laodicea condition is time, or I'm going to say is prophecy. Now, when we first dealt with this issue, we were beguiled ourselves, because we said, actually, it's not about time, it's about events, and the premier event is Daniel 11 verse 40. Yeah? That's when you start creating our reform line. I've got it here, 1989, and we didn't want to address the issue of time, which is why not only has our movement been in a mess, and that mess is what? Laodicean condition, individually, because we've got all of these good and bad people in, and people are going to say this doesn't look like the church triumphant to me, and we can't help but agree with them, is because we haven't understood our message correctly. We're calling the church, we've always been calling the church to what? There's a Sunday law that's about to happen. I mean, that's been our message, and everyone says, so what? We already know that. What are you teaching us more than we already knew? And then we've tried to defend our position by having these events, and it becomes more and more problematic, because after 9/11 we kind of like dry up a bit, and we dry up a bit because what happens after 9/11 that we're really going to target and identify. It's not that easy. It becomes problematic, and you see, whether we liked it or not, we've directed, we don't drift, we've directed into time now, got 2012, 2014, and now we talk about Raffia. Raffia is the premier event for us, close of probation. If I were to ask you what's even going to happen at Raffia, there's confusion. We have no idea really what it's going to look like. There's speculative ideas. This is our movement. We really have no clue about what Raffia is. All we know, it's 217 BC, two people fought, they had elephants, king of the north, king of the south. That's about it. It's pretty vague. We have no detailed information that we're currently teaching about Raffia. So I want us to be aware of that, because Raffia's imminent. So that's a summary of what we've got to so far. Any questions? What I've tried to do is, because people probably, I'll say legitimately, although I'm never sure if it's legitimate, complain that I don't come to conclusions or I sort of leave people hanging. So I've tried to not do that.
The Lord said that if the persecution wasn't cut short, that all would perish. How does that fit in to the line that, wasn't that part of his prophecy that that would be cut short? And how does that work?
I'm going to give a really bad answer. I'm not God. And so I can't answer that. What my response is this. When we talk about line upon line, it's not just saying the 1260 is a line. In that history, there are multiple things happening, multiple layers. And our problem is we're not very good at multitasking because those multiple layers seem to conflict one with another. I recognise that because what you're identifying is I've just developed a story that they weren't supposed to stop the persecution, and you've developed a line that says if they didn't, the whole project would have come to an end, the whole great controversy would have finished. What I could say is this: Babylon, Rome, papacy had been given a job to do, and when they were given that job they go too far. And so if they'd done the job properly, they would have kept on going back to their boss and saying, is that enough? Is that, he would have said, yeah, that's enough, no more, because if you go too far, you're going to beat my people to death, and that was never my intention, because it was a scattering and gathering. This is the southern tribes we're addressing. This is not the northern tribes. The northern tribes, when you dealt with the northern tribes, when you delivered a blow to them, they were annihilated. That was fine. But when you come to the southern tribes, you can't do that. You have to hold back. And they weren't willing to do that voluntarily. So he has to apply leverage to them.
Well, the other point was when France began persecution, didn't they go against the Catholics and persecute those who had been persecuting the Protestants?
Yes, but they're not doing it because they like Protestants.
Right.
They're doing it because they hate God.
Right. So it did change a little bit in that it's, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna give it some more thought. Thank you.
Sister Ollie?
We see the same story being pictured in Ezekiel 37, where they cried, the people of God were crying, we are cut off from our parts, and our bones are dry. So when God asked Ezekiel, can these bones live? In Ezekiel's response, you could hear despair. He said, Lord God, thou knowest, because Babylon was so oppressive. Just the same, God had to intervene and, bring about the promise of restoration for his people.
We're going to go into Habakkuk later on. We'll pick it up in our study. But if you go to Habakkuk chapter 1, I just want to read verse 13. It picks up a similar theme that Sister Olivine just brought to view. Verse 13, 1:13. This is God's people complaining to God. They're complaining to God. And the people that are complaining are the good people. These are the good people that are complaining in verse 13, because there's good and bad people. Thou art of purer eyes than to behold evil, and canst not look on iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou on them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he? So verse 13 says, God, you've got pure eyes and you can't look on iniquity. What's the iniquity that they say he can't look at? Who's doing this iniquity that they say, your eyes are so pure, you can't look at this kind of iniquity?
They are.
Brother James. It's a tough question because I'm not giving you context. So I know people are probably scrambling for context. So I want to see how we read this verse. I couldn't just give you the answer because that's all I wanted to do, but I want to see how we read that. There's enough clues in the verse.
When I first read it, I thought it was talking about the iniquity of the Jews, the righteous ones. So I'm still reading it, but that was my first thought.
Brother Graham?
Themselves.
The Jews? Sister Tess?
Babylon?
Brother Daniel?
I have to read it carefully.
Brother Larry?
Yeah,
Sister Rachel?
The Chaldeans, when God was using to punish them.
Chaldeans? The Babylonians? Brother Bob?
The verse seems like it's comparing the God's people who are not pure with those who are oppressing them that are more wicked than they are.
So who's doing the iniquity?
In this verse, when you talk about the second part, it's the oppressors.
So the Babylonians?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you read the verse and see it in context, it's the Babylonians that he's talking about. And this is in connection with what Sister Olivine was saying, that this punishment is going to be so severe, it looks like the nation's going to be wiped out. They're not just getting a slap on the wrists, they're getting real severe punishment. And it's so bad, they're now asking, it hasn't even happened yet, by the way, hasn't even happened, and they're already complaining. And the complaint is, how can a God that has got pure eyes look upon such wickedness? How could he allow wicked, evil people to do this level of work or criminality to God's own people? God, your eyes are purer than to behold the evil that the Babylonians are going to do. And you can't look upon the iniquity of their works. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously. This is the Babylonians. When it means wherefore lookest thou, take heed to how treacherous they are, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked, the Babylonians, devour the man that is more righteous than them. How are you going to stand back and let that happen? And God is going to let that happen, but it's in measure. So that's part of the answer I would argue about this 1773, because Rome is going to go too far, much further than it had permission to do.
Sister Kathy, was she saying though, how do you parallel that with us?
No, her question was, Papal Rome is supposed to hurt God's people, punish them for 1260. So when they stopped doing it for 25 years beforehand, I've argued they're doing wrong, and she's saying, well, if they hadn't had stopped before, we would have been killed. So how do we reconcile those two concepts? So I'm saying it's not that straightforward, because you've got multiple levels going on. We've introduced the subject of France, and we've introduced the subject of Islam. So there's a number of things to factor in there. It's not that straightforward. That's why our line, when we see what's going on, isn't that easy to pick up, because we can pick up different themes. But I guess my response to you would be, is because Babylon has gone too far, much further than they were supposed to. If they had just punished in measure, they could have gone the whole distance. But now she's become drunk with the blood of the saints. She's gone too far, Revelation 17:5. Okay. Have I not, for anyone, tied up any loose ends that they had that they want me to? So, okay, we had some issue and it's still not tied up in my mind.
I was contemplating the element of time, and in the Millerite history, their message was based on time, and we know that ours is not based on time. So what is the Lord pointing? What is he trying to show us when we got 2014? We got all these time elements, but it's not based on time.
Maybe you've misunderstood what I've said. I'm saying we have a message based upon time. That's what I'm saying.
Agreed.
Plenty of people disagree with that.
Can I ask a question though? Like, we looked at these signs and with the heralds of the morning, Christ was using different prophecies and combining, right? Is there a prophecy, like when we look at Habakkuk, those ancient prophets, that has been given that's not based on time?
It's a rhetorical question, I presume.
No, because we are of the view that our message cannot be based on time. And that has been in our movement. It's a mindset. So I'm asking the question, where in our Bibles have we seen in God's dealing with his people when he's giving a prophecy, especially relating to his people, that he does not attach an element of time?
Nobody cares about that because why don't we care, Brother James?
Spirit of prophecy says that time shall be no longer.
But then in the same spirit of prophecy, early writings, she says, in the voice of the thunders, God gave us the day and the hour. That same spirit of prophecy that says no more message on time said God gave us the day and the hour.
Okay, I'm not going to get roped into a discussion on time setting because that's not where I want to go. It's there, it's a problem in our movement and it needs addressing, resolving. Brother Daniel, go on.
It's about time setting.
Yeah, I know it is, that's why I'm saying. I know it is about time setting.
But you don't want to go on that?
Go on. I mean, I don't mind having a cursory discussion about it. But you know, if we were going to do this, we have to do it properly. We have to go back into the spirit across the quote. She says, third angel's message is not to be hung or not to be connected or with time. She's very specific about what she's talking about.
So it's interesting that the thunder is connected to time. So we're saying
What thunder?
the seven thunders.
Okay. How is it connected to time?
Because Revelation 10, you have the seven thunders, and then the angel proclaims that time shall be no longer.
Okay, just so seven
and
thunders.
Also because what she
I
said.
just want to, because we've got people who may not know what you're talking about. Revelation 10, seven thunders, verse 3. These things sound, and then it says, time shall be no longer. So that's the seven thunders connected with time.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also they heard the voice of God saying the day and the hour, and that was like a thunder. So time setting and thunder, they are somehow connected. And all the way marks we have 1989, 91, 95, 9/11,
1 second.
2014.
Before you, when you talk about this thunder that said the day and the hour, what are we talking? What is that?
I'm just pointing the connection of you have the thunder.
I just want
you
to
have
place
time
that
setting.
somewhere on a line.
When you hear the day and the hour,
The one you just referenced.
I don't understand. Sorry.
You quoted. You said there's a thunder that says the day and the hour. God said that, and you just said thunder, thunder. Let's connect them. Time. That's all. I mean, that's okay. That's what you did. Yes.
Yeah.
So all I asked is that passage that you said, God thundered and he said the day and the hour. Where is that in a line?
I think is in the minute cry. because that's when it talks about the hour of Jesus coming. But it's not that the point I'm making.
I know, but I just wanted to know. I just wanted to factor that in.
Yeah.
At least for my thinking. Where you placed that before October.
Yeah. October 22, because no, sorry, in the midnight cry, because that's when they know the day and the hour of Jesus coming. I would place that there.
So I'm going to put. I'll do our line because maybe it's easier for us. I'll put Raffia here. And I'll put 9/11 here. And you're going to say it's here. Somewhere in between. Is that right?
Yeah.
And you're going to say this is the midnight cry.
Yes.
And you're saying that, or Ellen White saying that when she even uses that that phrase?
Say it again.
When she gives us that phrase, this Spirit of Prophecy quote, I presume you're marking. Where is she using that phrase? Is she using it in this context, at the midnight cry? For closed probation?
I'm not sure.
You don't even know where it is?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not
Okay. You don't even care? So that was below the belt there. You just want to place it where you want to place it, because you want to go to Millerite history and say, the midnight cry, they knew the day and the hour, therefore, because the midnight cry is one of the thunders, I guess that's what you're going to say. You've got this passage, which is the thunder, is one of the thunders, and they know the day and the hour, so you want to make it midnight cry.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. So the point I was making was not in this direction, but okay. It was just to say that all the way marks we have, it's attached to time. So even though we say, oh, we are predicting just events, those 7 thunders, I'm pretty sure they are connected to time setting all day, because you have thunder connected with time setting. And when Sister White says time is no longer, if you look to that verse, she doesn't apply that just for 1844. If you can open in second selected message, page 105.
1 second.
.1. One selected message, 105.1.
One SM 105.1
Yeah.
after.
The book that was sealed.
105.1.
Second selected
Oh,
message.
I thought you said one selected message.
He did.
Sorry.
Okay, so this is 7 BC 971 as well. If you, the book that was sealed was not the book of Revelation, but that portion of the prophecy of Daniel which related to the last days. Scripture says, "But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words, seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, knowledge shall be increased." When the book was opened, the proclamation was made, time shall be no longer. The book of Daniel is now unsealed, and the revelation made by Christ to John is to come to all the inhabitants of the earth. By the increase of knowledge, the people is to be prepared to stand in the latter days. I read that really fast, not time to process it, but...
So I think it's interesting, the same verse she used to seal the time is the same verse she used to unseal the time. Because the opening of the little book is a message related to time. So when we use that verse to say, oh, time is no longer, we don't have prophetic time, we can use the same verse to say that we have prophetic time. Okay, and that's in the time of the end. She's applying that to the opening of the little book, and that's 1798. And you were showing at the camp meeting that after 1989 we have the gathering time, and that's the time that we can use time setting. So I think that's interesting.
Anybody want to make a comment? Ask a question?
Looking at the way Miller and the Millerites looked at the prophecies and saw a time, I see that they were looking at things that were given that pointed to a very specific date that was in their future. And I'm looking at in hindsight, I'm looking at everything and realizing that the time element, it's related to time, but it's not time like we're saying, oh yeah, the Battle of Raphia is going to happen on this date. We're looking at it as time because we're seeing all the patterns that God has established with all these things, and based on those patterns and things, we can see time. We can see that God's using time, the element of time, because it's related to all the prophecies and the patterns that we're looking at.
To what end?
To what end?
If it's just patterns. What purpose does it serve? Second witness, confirmation?
I think, as we talk about in, I think it's the effect of every vision. I think it's just all pointing to the great consummation here at the end. How I see
No, you
it.
didn't say that. Maybe you did. Maybe I misunderstood. You said we've got these events, then now we've got dates attached to them or time, and you're saying this is all like patterns. And I'm saying, to me, when you said patterns, it sounded like these are second witnesses that these events are true. And you said, but we're not doing that with Raphia.
No, I'm not saying we're not doing it graphic. I'm just saying we're not looking at a verse in the Bible and coming up with an exact date. As for instance, for Raphia.
Yeah, so
But I'm saying
what if I said that's about what we're going to do? We're going to predict the date of Raphia before it happens. Is that in agreement with what you just said? Because it sounded different to what you said. That we're not going to do that.
Well, if God's going to reveal that to us, then He reveals it to us. But right now, I don't see that any of us know that information.
That's not what my question is.
Okay.
My question is, what purpose is time serving now for us? Is it just second witnesses that we already knew 1989, then we got a time. We already knew 9/11, we got a time. 95, we got a time. We knew all of those dates. Now we just said, well, we can rubber stamp them because we've got these structures building up, all based essentially on 2520s. And once we do that, we say, our message is now even firmer than it ever was, which would just be the use of time as second witnesses.
And that's how I've been viewing up to this point. But I may not be correct in that.
You may be, but you may not be. But the only reason I asked the question, because it sounded like that's what you were saying, so I've just asked you, everybody, you don't have to answer, is if we just switched and says, by the way, Raphia is going to happen at this year, maybe this day or whatever, predictive, would it shake us? Would it scare us? The reason why I asked the question is because last time we did that in our movement, caused a big disturbance
Well,
6 years ago.
Yeah. One other point, though, I have to just looking at human nature. If we know a date, an exact date, there's an element of procrastination that goes into it, and everybody's going to not prepare until the last minute.
That's Ellen White's argument.
And I'm just saying that if we know that it's imminent, as we all can prophetically understand that it's very imminent, speaking of Raphia, then we know that the time is short. But how short is time? God knows.
Okay, if you're going to develop that argument, I've seen your hand, what are you going to do with Miller? If you're going to use the argument that human nature procrastinates and we're not going to sort our mess out until the 21st of October, how do you argue against what Miller did? Because Miller was on a commission from God, and God gave him those dates, him the movement, not the man.
Yeah.
That mitigates against everything that you've just said. their time element was necessary. And they never fell into that trap that we won't do anything until sort of the day before, essentially. That's the argument it will always go to. And Ellen White's argument is, if we put time into our message, we're going to say, we'll just cruise along till Friday, 5 minutes before Sabbath, and then we'll sort the stuff out. And she says, if you did that, that's not what God wants us to do. So he's going to keep it a secret, so you need to be ready every day. But the Millerite line doesn't operate on that. In fact, it's the very element of time that wakes them up, that prepares them.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Brother Theodore.
So,
Brother Larry.
obviously time setting's controversial, and I've been opposed to time setting since 1985 when the 1987 Jubilee movement was going on. And I studied this in detail. Now, the statement of Ellen White's where she talks about setting a time too far into the future is really going to be a reality, and is a reality for many people. They're setting a time way in the future, saying Jesus is not coming back now, it's going to be 30 years from now. And there's lots of people doing that. Some definite time, some just putting it off. So her argument there would apply. Regarding the idea of setting a time now, I believe as we approach all of the evidence that points to a specific date could very possibly tell us when the Battle of Raphia could occur. But it would not be, 20 years from now that we're going to be predicting a date for the Battle of Raphia. It would be very much as we begin to approach that, as we are. So the possibility of that happening, I see is very real.
Okay.
But it would have to be unmistakable based upon all the lines and all the evidence, all the patterns would have to be there.
All is a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it is a lot of
And the
stuff.
problem is, if we're going to use that argument all, none of us know all. So I'm kind of leaning towards not exactly Brother Bob's argument, but he says we're only human. I don't think we know everything.
No.
So we're not going to be able to draw all of this to give this rock solid answer. We're going to do the best that we can because we're human beings. What we're going to do, it has to be a good job. I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I was only being
That's what I
facetious with the
mean.
word all. I know what you meant, because no one's going to be able to do all of it because we don't even understand all of it. There's still too many things we don't even understand about the line of Christ. The reform lines, the templates that we have, the Millerite line specifically. I mean, we're just, looking at these things in a cursory fashion in these classes, and I suspect for a number of us, these are new ways of looking at them. So, if you didn't know this perspective, how could you develop a logic to say, okay, it's going to be on this date, Raphia, because we've got some time, without even knowing some of these things? I'm saying perhaps you could, because you don't need to know everything. The more you know, the more accurate you can be, the more sure you can be. But, yeah.
So just to add to that, since we've had these waymarks that we've passed that have been based upon time, and we all agree with that, it would be illogical for these other waymarks not to be based upon time that are coming ahead of us. They have to be based upon time. And some of them we may see. We may not understand them completely, but we'll see that they're going to be based upon time as well. And that's the way in which I see time happening. But I don't think that we're going to be time setting in the traditional sense. That is, Jesus is coming back on, December 31st or whatever year. That's not how it's going to be. It's these waymarks that have been based upon time that we are looking at, whether it's Raphia or Paneum, that we will see the time elements in them before they happen, because we have now started to recognize the patterns of how God works.
Larry? Sister Bromwell?
As I've contemplated this thought on time and see how the Lord has been leading us, pointing to this time situation, in my mind it brings this logic about. No public evangelism and public evangelism. It's been said in the spirit of prophecy for 150 years that we need to go out and evangelize the world. But the Lord has shown us a different path, typifying Abraham. Go sacrifice your son. He wasn't supposed to do that because that was a written law. So could this concept of time be the same logic of
I've used that logic. People hate it. They say, yeah, I don't care about that logic. Tell me about this statement here. I want to know this statement. And my argument is, you rejected the lines. And he's just like, Sister Bronwyn.
How I've understood thus far in the movement, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that other than 2014, and I'm not claiming to understand all the implications of 2014, but the lead up to 2014 wasn't predicted as a movement. We did not predict 2014 as a movement. So we have yet to see this movement predicting an advanced time prophecy of something that is happening. Am I wrong? I mean, this is something new, right? This isn't something we've been doing, and it's... Am I wrong?
I think we did it twice.
say it again?
Twice. Not in time, but what about the whole Trump scenario where we were saying Trump? That was going out, like
No.
setting yourself.
He said no.
No.
That's not time.
I know it's not.
No, we didn't predict Trump. There was people in this movement during that election period that were saying, but it could be Hillary because a woman is a church, and there's no way this movement was solidly unified saying Trump will be the president.
Okay, so what's your definition of the movement? Because you've just said, this rhetorical question, you said solidly.
I see your implications because the movement's a mixed multitude. You know, you have to pull out a remnant that's unified. For me, it would have to be a unified, solid core that
So-
predicts.
Let me ask you a question. We'll go back to this one here. Okay, not the time setting bit, but just the structure that we have. Who is this person? No, oh sorry, no. That just, no, forget that. Now who is that person?
He's a nobody.
No, it's not a nobody. Nobody. He's got a name.
Oh, Snow.
Snow. So, okay, before we discuss this, I didn't really want to go down here. This is not a man. When you're going to get this and bring it to the end of the world, would you say this is a man at the end of the world? So you're not going to say it's a man, okay? So we'll go back here. Is this man a symbol of the Millerite movement? Yeah? Okay. Who is opposing him here in August? If you want to pick July, I don't mind. Who's opposing him? Miller. Not only is he opposing him, Miller is now going to argue, if we have a chance, we'll actually read this. Miller's going to, you know what Miller's argument's going to be? Have a guess what Miller's argument's going to be. What? No man knoweth the day and the hour. That's Miller's argument against Snow when he time sets here. I'll round it off a bit. He says, he didn't say it like this, we got burnt, it's that way, it's not very good language, in April 1844, we got burnt, we should have learnt our lesson, and now, from now onwards, I'm never going to time set again. He got dragged, kicking and screaming, to accept this message. So, like you, I don't want to make Snow a man at the end of the world, and we shouldn't, if we're not going to do that, are we going to make Miller a man at the end of the world? You've got to be fair. You can't do that either. So at the end of so in this history, the movement is not solid. If you're going to use that phrase, it's not solid on anything. Plus, if we're going to mark this as August, who's actually on board with the time setting? A couple of thousand people, not many. The vast majority of the Millerite movement aren't even on board yet. They're clueless about what's happening. They need to be told. Isn't that right? Yeah. They're going to go out and is it 50,000 or whatever? All these people are going to pour into whoever they are. I'm not trying to identify who they are. I don't think they're Levites. But whoever they are, they're going to come in. So they don't even know about it. And this is a midnight cry. So when we start talking about solidly, what does solidly have to look like? If this movement's 1,000 people, 2,000 people, do we say we're only going to talk about solidness when all 2,000 of us are on board? Or does there have to be a real clash in the movement fighting against itself, that people are saying this is apostasy, and other people are saying this is the outpouring of the Holy Spirit that's going on here? Because in this history, you've got Miller fighting against Snow, and it's not just Miller. They shut down the presses upon this man. The presses were not allowed to publish his material. It was a clampdown. So he gets wise and he publishes his own magazine. That's like, if you're not going to video my presentations, I'm going to do my own videos. I'm going to get my own YouTube channel. I'm going to upload them. And this is the movement. And the vast majority of it, this is not just like odd people. This is Himes and Miller, which are symbols of the whole movement, the whole press. No one is accepting this. And we say, this was the voice of God or whatever. This was the movement doing this. So when we come to our history and we want to analyse, for instance, 2014, and we want to say, well, that wasn't the movement because we all weren't behind it, or we want to say, there were people in our movement that said maybe it's Hillary, maybe it's Trump. That was based, not people who were representative of the movement. That was weak, erring and failing men. Because the movement is symbolised by an angel. And an angel has 4 characteristics. We'll read that as we go. It's purity, power, glory, and wisdom. And if you oppose that, or you fall out of any one of those 4 characteristics, you become just a normal man. What was Daniel? Was he a normal man, or was he this angel? Depends what time of day you ask him. It's just the problem is, the only record we have of Daniel is when he's on job, when he's at work. We don't have any record of when he's off work. And so we tend to think this man was never erring or anything, but he's just a normal human being. So when we come to our history, we should have known it was Trump. It was weakness and human frailty that gravitated to Hillary, and we did that because we got sucked in to the media hype. If we had isolated and insulated ourselves from the newspapers, we would have been a lot firmer on that. And in that very time period, we would have seen that Trump was already going to be, or hoping to be president, in the 2000 presidential election. So he would have been president in 9/11, 2001, but it's a failed attempt. And when you can see that story, you know that's a prophetic story that's based upon the last 7 Judean kings. Because you can tie it into that story. There was a lot of prophetic arguments that we knew it would have been Trump. Above and beyond his richness and all of that stuff. It was a moment of weakness. We got duped, sucked into the media hype, when all the polls and stuff were going, and so we didn't want to look silly, we didn't want to stick our heads above the parapet. That's my version of 2016 in this movement. I think we failed miserably by not being firm on Trump.
Twice. We failed twice.
Whatever. Trump was not an issue on time, but I'm saying the way we view what the movement is, we need to be really careful about. Because when someone stands up and says, this is it, and we say, well, that's just one person's voice or whatever.
So at what point on our line do we get to where the movement speaks as a unified whole and is trustworthy? As a solid core?
Daniel 12:1?
You'll never see it. So
I don't think you're going to see it.
Choose a side, choose one of these YouTube presenters, choose that guy and go with him. He's got a platform, he might be the right one, I mean, there's all these dissenting voices up in the movement all the way up. It's scary.
Extremely.
Yeah.
I could be wrong on that. Give one example. No, brother. No, Sister Alyssa hasn't spoken. For a while.
I was going to bring our
Louder,
attention
please.
to
Sorry?
Louder.
Louder.
I was going to bring our attention to Great Controversy 370, where she talks about the time setting when it becomes when the people who are saying you don't know the time, those are actually the ones that are in fanaticism, because before, when they were saying that we could predict the time and it was correct, now those are saying, speaking out against the movement, saying nobody knows the time. She's saying that they're misapplying what Scripture is saying.
So that you're aware, she's talking about William Miller. He's a fanatic now. That's what she just said.
I think interesting this subject about when the movement is unified.
Let me just clarify. William Miller is not a person at the end of the world. I can't reiterate that often enough. It's a symbol of the movement. The movement is in disarray.
In the first vision of Ellen White, she says, until we heard the voice of God like many waters, which gave us the day and the hour of Jesus' coming, the living saints, 144,000, priests, the priest I'm adding to this, in number,
Thank you.
know and understood the voice, while the wicked thought it was a thunder and an earthquake. When God spake the time, He poured out us the Holy Ghost, and our face began to light up and shine with the glory of God, as Moses did when he came down from Mount Sinai. And we know that's Pentecost. And Pentecost is organization. And it says, by the time the 144,000 were all sealed, by this time, when they heard the voice of God, the 144,000 were all sealed and perfect united. So I think time setting, when they hear the day and the hour, that's what makes the movement unite. I think that's what's gonna unite us. When we predict Raffia, when we see that's coming, I think we're gonna come with unity to that message. As in the Millerite history, when they saw the day, the appointed time was October 22, they all came in unity to that. And I think the message is what brings us to unity. And that message is based upon time of October 22, that for us is Raffia. That's what I think.
So I would agree that I didn't want to make it sound too black. I'm glad he did that. That we're going to have some disagreements and things right to the very end. Already now there is level of unity. If you were in Italy, I don't know how many people were in Italy in our class, not a few of us anyway. Or if you watch the videos, there was an atmosphere there which was interesting. Some of the topics that were brought up were controversial, to say the least. And if you were there, it was interesting to see Elder Jeff's and Sister Kathy's reactions as they were in the back of the auditorium listening to presentations. And you don't get a feel of that when you just watch the videos, you know, because it's all clinical. But when you're there, there's some funny things going on. And it's not just with them, just with other people. You know, you just talk about a subject and no one's objecting to it. No one's objecting to some substantial changes in the way we look at things. And not a major amount of evidence is given. They're just kind of cursory studies just to introduce into the movement some new ideas, new ways of looking at things. And people aren't standing up and resisting those things, you know, in the way that you would expect, because resistance has been leveled before. People would argue against that, some of those things. So I don't want to deny the power of the Holy Spirit. The power of the Holy Spirit, I think, seemed at some level, came upon that camp meeting, and there was stillness, there was quietness, there was acceptance of those things. There was a really interesting point in one of those presentations where at the end of it, Elder Jeff stood up, and it wasn't recorded because the way the whole system was set up, they couldn't even get the audio of it.
It was.
I don't think they've kept it on though. They cut it off.
It's very bad to hear. That's
yes.
why we didn't publish.
Yeah, it was recorded, but very badly. So they didn't. So it's not. If you can't see it on the videos, basically. And what he was saying basically was, you know, I've opposed some of these things from the very beginning, and he was the premier opposer of that. And he just suddenly said, "Sounds reasonable to me." Not to say like he's rubber stamps or whatever, but he just said, "It sounds reasonable." So, you know, how does that happen? Because there's no new verses, there's no new passages, everybody's familiar with them. I didn't even go into the anti-time setting quotes, just laid out a structure and a line, and it seemed reasonable. To me, that's the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, so we'll run out of time. I just want to summarize by this, is when we say the movement, God seems to me to do things in funny ways that we wouldn't expect. You know, she tells us that. She says if it's going to be out of the common order of things when God finishes off his work. And we say it means it's not going to go through the regular channels, which is the conference system. He's going to raise independent ministries to finish the work. Independent ministries use those kind of quotes to justify themselves for their existence. All I would say is we need to be careful about how we understand when God gives a message into this movement, what we identify as the movement giving a message. Because I don't think all of us are going to all come together one day and say we had a dream or something and we all got some common message. It's never been that way. Someone stands up and says, I think this is what it looks like. And people look at it and they say, yeah, that seems reasonable. But sometimes it's not like that. Sometimes there is this resistance, and you know, in this history, there were people who were saying it seems reasonable, but there were plenty of people saying it seems unreasonable. And just because there's people who say these things are unreasonable doesn't mean it's not the movement speaking. If you're going to ask, how do we know? I don't have the answer to that. All I would direct us to is, if you go to Desire of Ages, I think it's chapter 50, page 455 and onwards, she talks about a person standing in the middle, and he's going to ask the question, who's speaking for God? This one or this one? You know, what is the voice of God? And her answer is, only those people who are converted can actually know God's voice. Easy to understand. My sheep hear my voice. If you're a goat, you can't hear his voice, you don't understand it. So if just based upon that principle, the sheep hear his voice. Only those people who are converted, who've got a personal walk with God, they will hear the ring of truth. They will see some light in that. becomes problematic. Back in that history, back in that day, where the subject of 2014 was rejected, when we look back now, my understanding as I see people talk about that subject is that they see, okay, if I do this, so this is talking about what Sister Bronwyn was saying. Today, you'll see a study that looks like this. Agree with that? And they're saying this is the foundations. So if this was the foundations, that means God was doing something. This is a movement subject. So we're now today saying 2014 is part of our message in the movement, regardless of how it was created. Because I understand the point you say back then it wasn't. But we now look at 2014 and say 2014 is now an established date. So if it's an established date, how did it become established? Not when did it become established. We established it, say, if we're going to say everybody agrees with it now, maybe last year. Maybe say 2017, we say, but you can't do it that way. You can't say it became established just because we accept it now. You have to say, how was it even created in the first place? And the creation of it was problematic. So what we need to do is, I think, is to go back and say, well, what was happening in that history? Because you can't say that the movement wasn't creating that date then, but now we say, actually, that was a movement, that was a date that the movement is going to accept. Because if the movement's running all through this history, it must be the movement that's creating these dates, isn't it? You can't get an outsider creating a date for the movement, because they're not the voice of God. So however we like the creation of that date, it must have been the movement doing that work, even though it doesn't, to our human eyesight, look that way. The reality doesn't, it looks ugly, however we want to describe it. Because if we're going to say the movement was doing that work today, or it's a movement date, it's an established date, because we've got 10 years of foundations, then we must know that it was created by the movement, even though humanly speaking, it didn't look that way. Sister Tess.
If we teach that the movement doesn't make mistakes, it had to be in place from the very beginning. It can't have been placed last year.
So people really have taken issue with this. I guess I'm the one who's pushed this, that the movement doesn't make mistakes. Because they say, well, you make loads of mistakes. And I'm saying, yeah, that's on a bad day when we didn't put our work hat on. We were just at home. Because we're weak and erring human beings when we're not listening to God. So I've tried to explain that, even though people just don't see it. But if we argue that the movement doesn't make mistakes, and we're saying here, look, we didn't make mistakes anywhere along this line. Isn't that, I mean, that must be our argument. Then therefore, we say, well, 2014 isn't a mistake. So we have to say, well, how was it created? And the problem everyone had was 2001 was created after the event, but it wasn't created after the event. It was created in 2001. It's just that we didn't see it then. And 2014 was created when? In 2014. It's just that we're saying that we saw it before. We saw that it was to be created. That's the only difference between the two. The things get created when they happen. So if we say, well, it's an established date, then we ask ourselves the question, well, how did we get that? How did we recognize that date? And the thing that people struggle with the most is that it was predicted and the other ones weren't. We're way over time. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we give you praise and thanks for your goodness and your mercy as we grapple individually and as a movement with the subject of time setting. Help us to not see this thing, this subject, this doctrine, this idea as a fight against the spirit of prophecy. Lord, help us not to have this shallow thinking, but help us to see how the subject of time relates to the Millerite history. Help us, Lord, to understand that history in a clearer fashion so that we can make an application for our own time. And in doing that, help us to ever be willing to see that maybe we've misunderstood, misread Spirit of Prophecy quotes. Some things seem clear, others are obscure. As we gather all of these inspired statements together, help us to develop a model that is fit for purpose, that can create and lead a movement. And Father, when we talk about the movement, help us to hear your voice speaking through human agents who in and of themselves are weak and frail. But you can use those people to do your bidding. May each of us have a relationship with you so that when you speak, we will hear your voice and know it's you that's making these statements. Be with us and bless us for the rest of this day. Bless the food that we're to eat. In Jesus' name, amen.